Breaking the cycle to step forward. Authentic conversations from lived experience and a professional perspective in overcoming abuse with Chris and Beverley Ann.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Breaking the Cycle to Step Forward podcast with myself, Chris and my lovely co-host.
I'm Beverley Ann. Hello.
And we have a lovely guest today. Her name is Chrissy, and I'll let her introduce herself in a moment. But I'm just going to read your bio first, Chrissy. So you are, like Bev and I, an activist, survivor. We're not academics. Bev nearly is, but I'm not. You are an academic and a proud single mum. And you use your lived experiences of domestic abuse and grooming to raise awareness of the issues relating to the abuse of positions of trust for young people in the age bracket of 16 to 19 education. You believe that the law currently fails young people from abuse of power by those entrusted with their care. And you use research and activism to raise awareness and campaign for issues faced by survivors of abuse. So a lot of work you do is right up Bev and I's street. We cover all of these kinds of issues. We talk about the prevalence, we talk about the impact, and we also talk about what needs to change. So lovely to have you on as a guest, and welcome, and please introduce yourself. Say as little as you want or a lot. It's all yours.
So I'm Christina, or Chrissy, prefer Chrissy. So yeah, I'm an academic researcher. I do all sorts of research around kind of mental health, social care. It's all co-produced. So I'm very much a believer in doing research to improve people's lives and doing it with people rather than about them. I'm also an activist, survivor, campaigner. That looks like kind of giving talks, writing about my experiences, working on sort of advisory groups, taking part in research. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here and really nice to see you both.
That's completely up my street as well, because I'm currently doing a degree in social science in psychology and counselling. So absolutely. So I'm in awe already in a lovely way. Yeah. So Chrissy, Chris, you've read out the bio. Chrissy, you've introduced yourself. So if you're ready, I'd love to go into it. Our first question is get this conversation rolling, which is great. So Chrissy, can you tell us about your experience of being groomed as a young adult and how that looked and felt for you at that time, and how it's the impact it's had on your mental health and relationships, because it's often something that people don't really understand.
Yeah, definitely. So I was quite a vulnerable young adult. I started my A-levels at 16 as usual, as most people do. And then I had anorexia and I had some problems at home, and I'd moved into supported housing. So I had to restart my A-levels again at 17. So I dropped out, rejoined, started again. So I was slightly older when I restarted my A-levels because of those problems that I had. And I had one particular teacher who sort of showed an interest in me right from the beginning, really. And to me at that age, I had very low self-esteem. I had lots of experiences that I think at the time I thought made me more mature and meant that I had life experience and that I had like grit, and I had all these problems that other people my age hadn't faced yet. But in reality, it made me more vulnerable, actually, I think. And this teacher, so that they paid me lots of special attention. So it was all the classic things that we know about grooming children. So sort of singling me out for attention, making me feel like I was exceptional, like I was very clever, like I was really good at the subject. Lots of sort of inappropriate banter sort of started to slip in. So sort of you know, he'd like call me baby and stuff in like a jokey way, and sort of touched my shoulder as he went past, and lots of sort of things that on their own seem quite harmless, if a bit inappropriate, but just kind of lots of it that sort of built up over time. And in the place I was at, because when I restarted my levels, I had basically no friends. All of my friends were in the year below, so I was totally isolated. Didn't really know anyone in the class, and I just kind of getting that special attention and feeling like someone saw something in me that was positive, when I just had so much toxic shame at the time, and I just thought I just had such a poor self-image. Really, it was so intoxicating to have that sort of attention from a teacher, especially when it was lots of the grooming played out in front of other people. So it was lots of kind of like, which almost kind of was like bolstering me, I guess, and sort of making me feel like, oh, maybe, you know, if this person thinks this of me, this man who was 34 years older than me, so he was in his 50s, and at the time I was when he started teaching me, I was 17. You know, I just sort of thought, well, if this really respectable, much older, really smart teacher thinks this about me, then like that was so, there was something really addictive about it. So of course I reciprocated it, and we kind of got into this sort of like flirting thing. I don't think I ever thought it would actually lead to anything. But then when I was just about to leave college, so he was still my teacher, but I was in my final year, he gave me his phone number and his address and stuff, and we started to text. And then he started to sort of take me out of college. So like take me somewhere, and like we'd go and talk and hold hands and stuff. And then one night he invited me round to his house. And he told me that he has a 3-bedroom house. So I was so naive. I genuinely thought, I brought my overnight bag and stuff. And even at that point, even though it was all flirty and stuff, and he obviously liked me in that way, even at that point, I don't think I had computed that I would be sleeping with him.
Yeah.
But when I got there, the rooms other than his bedroom were basically very visibly out of use.
Yes.
And he showed me to his bedroom, and it was all kind of, you know, new, fresh bedding and all that sort of stuff. And I just had this sort of penny drop moment of like, oh, right, you know, okay, like nothing I can do about this now, basically, because I was in his house. I'd had a drink, you know, we got there and started drinking wine and stuff. And you know, I had to go into college and see him the next day. So I remember thinking, you know, there just wasn't really a choice there. There wasn't really a kind of, because if I said no, I was really, so my big goal at the time was to get into university and to kind of start afresh a bit at university. And I needed to get good grades to get into university. So it's so sad that this was on my mind, but I genuinely just thought a lot during that period, like, you know, if I stop this, if I say that this isn't what I want, then what if he fails my A levels and stuff? And because it's not illegal, because I was over 18, I genuinely thought that if I told people about it, that they would just say, oh, you slag, you know, what you're doing, leading on that really popular, lovely teacher that everyone likes and stuff. And I thought that I didn't think I would be met with any sort of compassion in that situation. And I remember literally Googling, is it legal to have sex with my teacher? And basically it basically said, as long as you're over 18, as long as you pass your 18th birthday. So I was like, okay, so this is so I guess this is fine. So yeah, so that was the grooming, and it moved very quickly. So once we'd had that initial the texting and talking and meeting up outside of college. And then once I stayed over and we slept together, and he dropped me off at college the next day, and then I moved in within a week. It moved very, very, very fast. And because I was in that supported housing sort of situation, I definitely didn't have the support that other young people might have had. And I think I just sort of thought, oh, well, I kind of tried to turn it around in my head as like being a good thing, really. And I can, get like, move on from that situation. And yeah.
So can I ask a question, Chrissy? Because, and thank you so much for your honesty. You've been very honest and very clear in it, and you can really see the pattern, and it's shocking. It, can't say anything other. It's completely shocking on his behalf. And I just want to reiterate that on his behalf. But as you say, very strong, courageous, your strength was all there, very resilient. But then, as you said, very vulnerable, and you can actually understand all of it. The other thing that, let's be frank here, with any young person going through that, who's isolated, who's vulnerable, who's been through some challenging experiences, it is intoxicating. Here's a learned older person who at that time, you respect your teachers, you respect your adults, all that messaging going around, who's taking advantage of you. And the hardest challenge there, especially with young people at that age, when you've got that from somebody and you try to say like, oh, I don't think this is a good idea, even if it's not illegal, that challenge is huge, because they're so clever at grooming that actually they can become isolated from the people that do support them, if they had support as well.
Yeah, and that definitely happened to me when people did start to find out about it, because it was quite a secret relationship for a while. And people did start to find out, obviously people were mortified by it, and I got lots of people saying that this is so wrong, but I would just cut people off. And he was very good at sort of making it, he was very good at framing the whole situation as this sort of great, almost kind of magical love that was so special, but no one understood it, and it was only me and him that could understand it, and the whole world was against us, and it was like me and him against the world sort of thing. And when you felt, I had up until that point felt quite alone, having that with someone, even though I wasn't attracted to him, I was never attracted to him. I mean, he was an old man.
Yeah.
I never actually wanted to sleep with him. I never actually wanted to be in that situation. But I did, what he offered me in terms of that sort of what I thought was connection.
Yeah.
Was, I would have given anything for that. And it to me didn't feel like, I didn't understand really just what I was getting myself into.
No. And let's be frank, everybody wants and needs that emotional support connection. We're human beings. It's so important for us, and to have found it in someone, who's highly respected. And I'm going to keep using those words because it just shows the imbalance of age, societal positioning, also being a teacher and a pupil, the power dynamics were all there. Chrissy's got a hand up there. Chris, what is it you would like to say?
Yeah, so obviously I didn't want to interrupt you there, Chrissy, because we need to give you time and space to share your lived experiences really clearly, like you have done. But there's a couple of things that I want to bring up to proceed with the conversation. So you mentioned that your upbringing made you a vulnerable young adult, and I feel the same, and I'm sure Bev could probably share that as well, that we've shared many times in many podcasts that because of our lived experiences, we haven't been loved, cared for, nurtured in the normal way. And so when anyone does show us a little bit of care, nurture, love, then we will go after it, because that is human nature. That is what we all want. That we all want connection. We all want love. So many of us will go and find it wherever we can. And also that does make us very vulnerable for further abuse, because adults can see vulnerability in people, or they will hang around enough to know that a young person hasn't got anyone looking after them particularly, doesn't really know what's going on, even if we do turn up and act more mature. And then they will exploit that. It's happened time and time again, and there's so many different stories we could share. There was the teacher and the young person that went off abroad because they had this love that only those two understood, and the rest of the world didn't understand that grooming that had gone on. The case of Philip Schofield, for example. So even though it's alleged and he was never brought to court or anything like that, when we look at a clear-cut case, there was grooming. That young person was a young person when that friendship started, and there was an imbalance of power and control. And then the sexual relationship probably did start when he was of age 18. But it was the grooming that happened beforehand, just like in your case that you've shared with us. So there's lots of things that we're talking about here that the everyday person that doesn't know about sexual abuse and exploitation and how it plays out doesn't really comprehend. And you can see that on the comments of any stories of grooming, and that well, that child, whether it be a boy or girl, they're of age, they know what they're doing, they led that teacher on, didn't they led that person on. No. They
Absolutely
don't get it.
not.
So the way that you're explaining it is perfect. So have you got anything to say about anything that I've just said?
Yeah, so I think the things that can make a young person vulnerable, there's so many things that made me vulnerable. I didn't have a horrific childhood. It was, I did have respected parents. I was very lucky in lots of ways, but I did have some, I did experience abuse. And I then experienced lots of challenges with my mental health from very, very young age, in the form of eating disorders and anxiety, depression, all those sort of classic sort of ways that trauma manifests itself, the ways that we cope.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately I ended up with a very almost no sense of self, basically, almost no, because I had had some difficult experiences, and then subsequently felt very isolated and felt like there was no one I could speak to, and desperately been sort of seeking that and wanting people to speak to, but just not being able to do that. And I think I was almost primed and ready for someone like my abuser to come along and just show me a little bit of attention. So when I look back, the way that he treated me, he did lots of all the love bombing and all the classic grooming stuff at the beginning, but it wasn't that amazing. But for me, I was just so just any of that sort of attention and that sort of like being made to feel like I was a person that someone wanted and that was valuable was just like a drug to me. And I wouldn't, I felt, and I did, it was almost like I was addicted to it. And then that was so weaponized by him very quickly, because then it became sort of very quickly, once I've moved in and stuff, it became basically, if I didn't do what he wanted me to do, then he would withdraw it instantly. So he would kind of, it was very hot and cold. So it was like, I love you as long as you're doing exactly what I want and behaving how I want to behave.
Yeah.
And that's where the coercive control was there right from the beginning. Right from the very conception of the relationship, there was that power imbalance which lent itself so nicely to coercive control.
Yeah.
And because I was the age I was at, and I was so good at sort of like adapting in sort of social situations and and not being myself. I had no sense of self really. I just became exactly who we wanted, and I would happily just, I was going through my life those first couple of years, learning as much as I could about what he did and didn't want me to do, what reminded him of his ex-wife, you know, what would send him into, you know, being angry and upset with me. And I just, my whole life was about being exactly who we wanted, exactly what would make him happy.
Yeah.
And in that way, it was very harmonious for a couple of years. It was very, I thought, oh, this is great. We never have an argument. And of course, we never had an argument because I never did anything that he would. I just did exactly
what you didn't rock the boat in any way, shape, or form, did you?
No,
you just did.
I had like no friends really. I didn't really socialize because he was very jealous, as you can imagine. So I just sort of lived like an old woman, basically. I lived like I was in my mid-50s, you know, completely had all the same routine as him. I even changed sort of like the music that I listened to and like the way I dressed, everything. And it wasn't like he was, it's the thing about coercive control, it wasn't like he was saying to me all the time, oh, don't listen to that music or don't wear that. It was more like his reaction to things, and it was very subtle reactions to things. So just like, I've never seen you wear that before. And then just that enough, like the look on his face would be enough for me to be like, oh, he doesn't like it. So I'd never wear it again. Or like, if I was speaking to a friend, he'd say something like, oh, you know, I didn't know you two were so close, sort of thing. Or like, you know, we make these little comments. And I got so good at picking up when he was unhappy that I would just be like, okay, I won't do that again. So it was that was the hard thing to prove about what became very coercive and controlling, is that it wasn't just one single, he was never saying to me, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. It was the pattern of like, I'll treat you really nicely as long as you do exactly what I want, basically. And those subtle, constant, everyday messages about how I behaved and what I was doing, that he would reinforce.
Classic conditioning, isn't it?
Yeah, like it was
conditioning.
And the way he would punish it was so easy for him, because all he had to do was just ignore me or just stonewall me, or just because that was for me least, like I couldn't cope with him going silent on me, or him being unhappy. Basically, for me, felt like the worst thing in the world, because I became conditioned to just live my whole life in terms of keeping him happy and making him happy. And it was like, if that collapsed, that was like the end of the world for me. In those moments when I did do something he really didn't like, and he would go get really angry with me and sort of ignore me, or sort of like call me names, and sort of he was really good at just sort of really twisting the knife and sort of saying things that really got me in the self-esteem, which I had none of. Feel like the worst, most horrific person in the world. So I was just terrified of that all the time.
So Chrissy, was there a defining moment when you suddenly thought, whoa, hold on a minute? Or was it a build-up?
I think, it was probably, so I ended up with complex PTSD while I was still with him. So I was with him for 7 years in the end. And I ended up with complex PTSD while I was still with him, because I had some close bereavements and some traumatic experiences, and I ended up really poorly, and then my anorexia got triggered, and really struggling with my mental health. And I think it was his reaction to it. So basically, when I stopped looking the way that he liked me looking, so I lost weight, and when I was more, I had to hide a lot of it around him, because he didn't want to know. He didn't really believe that there was anything wrong with me, and he always saw it as, he would always try and twist it as like into an excuse for not, like, me trying to leave him, like, so me having all these mental health problems and stuff as a way to distance myself from him. And in the end, I talked to him about you know, he would be desperate for me to talk to him about what was going on with me, but then when I would talk to him, he would be very dismissive of it all, and very much sort of like, oh well, you know, that happens to everyone, you know, you've got to move on with your life, you've got, you know, what you're doing, you know, wasting your time thinking about bad things that have happened, you know, we've got to move on, I don't have long left, he'd love to say. You know, because he was like 60 odd by then. But I think it was when I told him about some of my experiences as a teenager, and some of my experiences of abuse, basically. And he said to me, I'll never forget it. It took so much out of me to tell him and to talk about it, because I really didn't want to. And he looked devastated, and he had this it was just looked so anguished, and he just looked at me and he just said, well, that's another nail in the coffin for my sex life, isn't it, Chrissy? That's what he said. And that, I think in that moment, I just had this sort of penny drop moment when I just thought, how am I going to get out with this? Like, oh, what? You know, just this real moment of sort of horror, I guess. And then things, you know, everything got worse and worse after that. And everything, like every sort of, the whole thing, like the weight loss and the trauma symptoms and stuff, he saw as excuses, especially excuses to not have sex with him. And then him being unhappy, like, because I was still in his pattern of like trying to desperately to keep him happy. Him being unhappy was so awful to me, and I felt so bad about it, and I felt so much shame and so much guilt about the impact I had on him, that I ended up just sort of going along with things anyway, and just everything I did was just to keep him happy, basically.
Yeah.
So what made you end the relationship? What was the turning point? Because obviously you put up with so much, bless you, that further harmed you, your self-confidence, your self-esteem, your health. What was the thing that made you leave that relationship?
So in the end, lockdown happened, and then I didn't last long. I lasted till June. I lasted 3 months, and then I tried to take my own life.
Right.
And I tried to leave him after that. I had one good friend who was amazing and really saw through what was happening in a really genuinely supportive way. She was very just not pushy, and just listened to me, and just was a very safe space. She helped me sort of try and leave after that, because when I got home from hospital, he basically started drinking the second that we got him through the door. He was an alcoholic, basically. Started drinking as soon as we got through the door. And then I just got woken up at 2 a.m. to just him shouting and just being really nasty to me, just saying that he loved to say I was a lesbian, and sort of that the friend I had was grooming me because she was a lesbian, and she was trying to steal me from him, and that I was mental, sort of like no other man would put up with you, and you know, I destroyed his life, and I put him through the worst trauma of his life and stuff, and just really raging at me. And he was really drunk, and sort of, and I just went into full, my usual trauma response up until that point had been fawn mode. So I'd just been, oh darling, oh what can I do? I'm so sorry, and just sort of like cower. But I had that genuine fear in that moment. I think something about the anger that was coming off him, and how, you know, the fact that he was drunk, and he felt like he got more and more desperate. So I packed my bags, and he followed me around the house, and it was like blocking the doors and stuff. And I just didn't really say much. I was just like packing my bags, and I already had a hospital bag, so I was like grabbed it, and then I just literally just ran out the house. I just ran off, got in the car, and then drove at 2 a.m. to my one friend's house. Thank God I had her.
Yeah.
And then she tried to help me sort of, you know, she helped me sort of with places to stay and stuff like that.
Yeah.
To leave, but he did then, basically he started to turn up the sort of guilt and stuff that, you know, that I was going to leave him homeless, that I'd ruined his life, that that he's not well, that he's gonna, even that he was suicidal, and he started to threaten basically to talk to us. I at that point was very isolated. I had no one. I didn't speak to my family. I had no friends really anymore. But he was threatening to go to, especially my family, and tell them all sorts of stuff about me. And he would frame it as kind of like, I need to let them know that about, that you're a liar and like what you're saying, and that they're the only ones that can help me, and all this sort of, he just really sort of twisted everything and made things very scary for me. So I started to go back, I started to visit him, and then eventually, because he would turn up the sort of threats, really, I started to stay overnight, and then I ended up having to start sleeping with him again because he started to do the whole he would just, I just had to keep him happy basically, which was really traumatic and awful. And that was I just felt like I was in a sort of psychological thriller book during that time. It was a period of about 8 months, and it was just horrific because whenever I wasn't with him, I was so worried about what he's going to do, what's he going to, who's he speaking to, what's going to happen, what's he going to be like next time I turn up, is he going to be drunk? It was just awful. So I would go back to the flat that I was staying in and just like collapse and just sleep. And then the rest of the time, it became half of the week I would spend with him, and I'd stay over, and I just had to like pretend I didn't have PTSD, pretend I didn't have an eating disorder, pretend I loved him and wanted to be with him and everything was fine. And then that all got, he put more and more pressure on me to move back in. He wanted me to find somewhere else for us to live because the tenancy was running out on the house. That was all, everything was my responsibility, and me not being there was the whole reason for, everything falling apart in his eyes.
Yeah.
So eventually it just got too much. I got sicker and sicker and sicker, ended up with a heart problem. I was like really underweight, really poorly, fainting all the time. And it was all physically painful. So having sex with him was physically painful. Like the whole thing, I was just in so much physical pain and emotional pain that in the end, in March, I think it was March 2021, it's like a switch flicked in my head, and I was at his house, and I just brought him his shopping, and he just stood there. He would often like just be stood there as I walked in. He'd just like stare at me and not say anything, and he did that, and I just remember just sort of looking at him, and I just went, I'm really tired. I'm gonna go now. And then I just went, and I think he followed me out, and I don't remember what he said, but I just rushed off and I just went. Then I went back to the flat, and just, it's like something flicked in my head, and I just started to clean my whole flat, organized everything, laid things out, all the things I'd borrowed off people and stuff, and put post-it notes on it all, and organized my life basically. And then I walked down to a railway line and ended up stood on an overpass, and I was waiting for the next train to come to jump in front of, and I felt in that moment, I felt no fear. I was not emotional. I wasn't sad. I wasn't, I felt genuinely nothing other than, it was almost like this sort of resignation that this is something that I had to do, and that it was just doing it almost like a chore, really. It was just like, right, I've got to get this out of the way, and that's it. There was no anguish in it. Whereas like other times when I'd been suicidal and the other suicide attempt I had was full of anguish and it was full of pain and it was full of emotion, there was none with this one. It was very much just, this is what I'm going to do. And what happened was a cat came up. So I was on this overpass in the middle of nowhere, and I just heard this meowing behind me, and there was just a black cat had come up onto the bridge, and I was like, what the heck? And I thought I was hallucinating, and it just kept meowing at me. So I got down off the ledge, and then as soon as I kind of knelt down, the cat jumped on my knee.
Oh.
And then in that moment, I just started crying, and then it's like that broke the spell in a way, and I just kind of went, oh God, and I started to get scared about where I was, and I started to feel cold. I started to, all of the feelings came back, and I just sat and talked to this cat for ages. It just sat on my knee. It was amazing. And then I saw a sign for Samaritans, and I rang Samaritans. I tried to ring them, and tried to ring them, I think 8 times. They didn't pick up. So then I rang the crisis team. And then before I knew it, I think I was on the phone for about a minute and the police were there already.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
And then they read the messages from him and stuff, and I told them about what was going on, and they told me not to have any further contact with him, and they helped me get the rest of my stuff from him. And they were amazing. So yeah, that's how I left in the end, by the skin of my teeth, literally.
Chrissy,
how old was you at that stage?
So by that time I was 26.
Yeah.
So I've been with him for 7 years.
7 years.
Yeah.
So you've clearly explained in a lot of detail and a lot of depth how this whole experience has impacted you. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit more about how the stories of like Phil Schofield and Hugh Edwards, how they help us understand the bigger issue of abuse of power, like you've just described, and why don't people see something like the teacher having a relationship with an 18-year-old student as abusive? Because you've clearly showed the imbalance of power and control. You've clearly showed the impact it has on you, your mental health, your physical health. You've clearly showed the coercive control and the imbalance of power through everything that you've shared with us. So what else would you like to add by me asking you those 2 questions?
Yeah, I think I just really want to help be part of the conversations that change people's perceptions about power and about consent, because I think we too readily assume that there's this binary point where you turn 18 and you suddenly have all the wisdom in the world to make all your own decisions. And we need to think about, especially in these high profile cases lately, like the Schofield case and stuff, he's got so much, not just power in terms of his age, you've got power in terms of his age, he's got power in terms of his money, he's got status, he's got celebrity power and kind of what he can access and what he can do because of that status. He has got, if you look at in terms of the power imbalance, it's just so enormous that it baffles me that anyone could say that a young person, 17, 18, 19, even 20, is going to stand a chance against that. If a person in that position is showing them special attention, wants something off them, and especially if they're offering them money or something like that, then they're not going to say no, are they? And I'm sure they've got all sorts of things they can threaten as well to coerce that person into doing what they want. And yeah, I just think we've got a really long way to go in terms of the compassion and the understanding that we show young people after they turn, I mean, it's after 16 really, because you just hear so much sort of, oh well, they know what they're doing, oh well, when I was that age I could, blah blah blah. You hear so much nonsense around it, and I've certainly had it myself, even with my story being so extreme, because this wasn't just a teacher who was 5-10 years older than me, which you hear about a lot, which is also wrong. and
Yeah.
should be illegal, in my opinion. This was a teacher who was the same age as my dad. He was,
Yeah.
Yeah.
was so much older than me.
So, Chrissy, if thinking about your scenario, and that will be reflective of so many that's happening around us now, because we'd like to believe that yours is the only case, and sadly, it's so not. What do you feel could have been more available to you as a young person, or even someone, other teachers watching this? What would you like to think is now available, or could be learned from listening to your story? Because you're very powerful and you're a speaker and you share a lot of this to others to educate and raise awareness. What do you
Yeah,
think
I
could
think
change for you if that
I
was in
think
place?
it's all awareness, lots of awareness around grooming, around what grooming looks like, what a student that's being groomed looks like, because it's dead obvious. It's like often they're, hanging around a lot after class. They're kind of like, they don't have many friends. They're showing a special interest in a certain subject. They're, being secretive with their phone, or they're, there's so many signs that I just don't think we're very good at picking up on. I think it's also awareness for young people about grooming, and about how, yes, this might be something that you think is glamorous and amazing to be with an older person who's your teacher. But for all of these reasons, that is wrong. And for me, I would like that. I would like it to be illegal. I would like it to be, whether you've turned 18 or not, I would like it to be an abusive position of trust, a sexual offence, because
Yeah,
that is using their position, which they're contractually obliged to safeguard their students, and they're not only not doing that, but they're having sex with them. It's just it's baffling to me how that could not be considered against the law. So I think lots of
absolutely.
awareness for teachers, awareness for students, and also the law recognizing the impact that these sort of relationships can have on young people, and closing that loophole. Because at the moment, you could, in sixth form especially, some sixth forms are attached to schools as well, so you could know this teacher from when you're 11,
Absolutely. And I
and then
work,
wait till your 18th birthday. At the moment, that's fine. And well, so it is illegal if you can prove the grooming, but often there's no way to prove, having special
no,
look class, and being tapped on the shoulder and being called baby in class and stuff. How am I gonna, especially if they're clever, there won't be a trail in terms of text messages and all that sort of stuff. So I just think it should be something that we take really seriously.
I absolutely 100% agree with you. I myself work with young people, and they're vulnerable young people. And even listening to your story, I'm like, well, they're going to be 18 before they finish education. And because I work in social care, in residential care, the double whammy there is not only will they reach 18, but because they're 18, they have to move out of the supported residential home, and they go into independent living. So, that is my biggest fear, because, and I personally encourage them to have independent support outside so it can continue through, because legally and contractually, we can't have a relationship with them after 18 unless there's proper safeguarding. And I absolutely 100%. But then I think, wow, we really underestimate our young people. And yes, they have a strength and a tenacity, but on the other side of that, there's a huge vulnerability.
Yeah, and it's just, yeah, this is just what I find so concerning, is that young people turn 18, and then it's almost like we just expect them to be fully equipped to go out into the world, and then and make really well informed decisions, and be able to consent in these sort of situations. Yeah, I think especially for care experienced young people, there's just that extra layer of that need for connection, and that uh, just I'm sure that it makes people really vulnerable as well to all sorts of grooming, criminal exploitation as well.
Yeah,
all that.
absolutely.
So we just need to think about how we can better protect people.
Yeah. I can see you waving, Chris. It's all right. It's just what it is, Chrissy. We love, we want to give you all the space, but we could both talk for hours. So we're very aware. So, Chrissy, over to you.
Me, Chris. Yeah.
Chris, sorry.
So
Yes.
I just wanted to be a bit of a devil's advocate here and just put a few pointers in, as I always do. So I used to hang around my teacher for safety because I was bullied at home and within the school. So I used to always hang around the teachers that showed me a little bit of attention, and I became a teacher's helper. What did you used to call them? You had a
Classroom
special
assistant?
name. Yeah, no. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I used to hang around the teachers for safety, yeah? And it's up to the teachers not to go over the line to abuse and coercion.
Absolutely.
Yeah? It's their professional job to know where the boundaries are because they're the adults and they've got this power. So therefore, they do not cross the line. So if you obviously are a teacher and you do go there, you are ethically and morally not doing the right thing. But also, when you are the young person, you wouldn't want necessarily another adult to stick their nose in because when you're that age, we've all been 16, 18, we all know what's best for us, don't we? And what we're going through is what we want. Yeah. I'm not saying it's right or wrong because we've got this experience and someone is showing us that attention and we want that to continue.
Yeah.
Even if it's morally and ethically wrong, we don't know that because we are the child and young person. So I think there is, as you said, Chrissy, this education that pupils need, students need, as well as the professionals, maintaining what does a teacher-student relationship look like, and everybody's on the same page, and we get educated on that. Yeah. And then everyone knows what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, and where the boundaries is, and not to cross that. Because if everyone knows the rules, then when those rules get broken, the children, young people get protected, and the professionals are meted out with the punishment that should be meted out against them. Because even though we are 16 and 18, whatever the age is, we feel that we are mature. We feel that we have got a right to live our lives the way that we want to live it. We don't have the life experience. And many of us don't know that we are being exploited, abused. We don't know that. And we don't know that until we are adults. And with the hindsight, we can look back and go, that was this. But when we're going through it, we don't know it. So therefore, the rules of the game need to be known by everybody so that we can protect children and young people better. And also professionals are clearly told that their duty of care looks like this. And if they do that, then they've broken the rules and therefore there's a punishment for that.
Yeah, I just think my case highlights the moment it is in the situation I was in. He could have been struck off as a teacher.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what's happened with that, but that's the consequence really, is the professional consequences. So you risk losing your career in that sort of situation. But the reality is, if the student is over 18, I think most of these, like the college I was at, I think most of these institutions would much rather sweep it under the carpet. So my abuser, he was given voluntary redundancy the year after we got together. So he was offered a nice big redundancy package and he left, and then he retired because he was so much older. He just retired. So there was no, and this is why I think that it needs to be in the law. There needs to be something that means that people are punished if they abuse their contract, that privilege to have contact with young people who are so vulnerable. If they abuse that privilege, they should, you know, they should be punished by the law, not just by the professional bodies that they're
Absolutely, because how many people, and I saw a comment about Philip Schofield not so long ago, so anything that's happened with him we obviously know is allegedly, but the first thing people say, even about Hugh Edwards, now he has been convicted, and yet I saw somebody the other day, there's two different comments. One was he hasn't been convicted, so fact is there's nothing wrong. That's their first thought. And secondly, oh, Hugh Edwards was set up. Hugh Edwards was not set up, and I tried to raise awareness and education for that. This is the fact of what he pleaded guilty to and why it only went to a magistrate's court. And actually, if he had said not guilty, it would have gone to a higher court, and then he could have got higher sentencing. He knew that. He has the money to know that. He also put him in a place for his wellness, okay, but that also gives him, he had the right advice, let's put. So I think what we do in society, not us personally, in society, we look at the adult and look at their rights. Well, hold on, where's this young person's rights? You know, allegedly, Philip Schofield is paid for and does pay for the legal fees for this young man. That in itself should not legally be allowed. That in itself needs to be taken away for anyone who is innocent as well. No, you can't do that. You cannot do that. That's a safeguarding issue for both the young person and for the adult. And you can hear, you know, Chrissy, you know, your story is very powerful. It's how you relay it as well. And there's a lot that needs to be changed, you know, and it's our entire thinking. And it really bores me, it shocks me, and I don't like it, how we put so much on to the 18, 19-year-old shoulders as if they are this, you know, suddenly, because it's their birthday, as you said, you've got all this wisdom, and yet here's a person who's many years older. Why aren't we going to them and saying, what the hell do you think you're doing? So,
and
you know,
often, you know, that grooming all goes on, and then the young person leaves the educational setting, and then it's not that educational setting's responsibility anymore, is it? And then that is usually when the relationships get established, even if nothing has happened before they leave that educational setting. Yeah, it's not right.
So sadly, we're coming to the end of time, Chrissy. So this is the time when we have reflection and think of, you know, what is your last word? Okay, so Chrissy, this is your opportunity. This is your to wrap up this session, but you're more than welcome to come back. If somebody's listening to this and they're working within a school environment and they can see different things, you know, happening, they just feel that something's not right, what would you say to them, Chrissy?
I would say take it seriously. Always act with that sort of compassionate curiosity. Think about the systems that are in place around that young person and about their individual situation, and just try and have those gentle conversations around what might be happening, and report safeguarding concerns, and if they're not listened to, kick up a fuss and seek further advice from whoever you can seek advice from, because I think a big problem is that safeguarding concerns just aren't reported. People don't want to be that person that is raising the red flags and the concerns. It's much better to report a concern and for it to be found that there's nothing going on than it is to miss something that potentially could ruin a young person's life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Chrissy. Chris, what are your last thoughts? Because I know there'll be plenty bubbling around there as well.
There is always. That's why, Chrissy, you're more than welcome to come back on and cover anything that we've not covered today once you've listened back to your podcast. But for me, it's like we've always had a teacher at school, haven't we, that we've all fancied. We've always had that teacher who we have a crush on. But that's it. It's children and young people having a crush on a teacher. The teacher, no matter what age they are, should never cross those professional boundaries, ever. It's their responsibility to safeguard the children and young people. That's all I've got to say.
Yeah, and thank you so much. I mean, my thoughts, there's so much to think, but I do really think that it is about the young people always. You know, let's start protecting them and be mindful. And as you said, Chrissy, it's those gentle conversations. We don't have to run in like a bull in a china shop. It's allowing them space. It's saying, you know, or you know, I've noticed that you've been hanging around some. What else has been happening for you? You know, encourage them to, you know, be involved with other people as well, so that it's more healthier. And they're just small things, because I know that some people listening want something tangible that they think, oh, what do I do now? So it's small steps. It's not giant leaps. Anyone listening to this, if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask Chrissy, please email us at breakingthecycle2stepforward@gmail.com. If you're listening to this, self-care is very important. I know that I'm going off to do something nice for self-care. Chris, I know you're doing something for self-care. Chrissy, have you considered your self-care after sharing so honestly and openly for today?
And have a little relax after this, I think.
Lovely. So please check in with yourself, and whatever you're doing after listening to this podcast or watching us on the video, take time for yourself to reflect. And we thank you so much, Chrissy. And it's time to say goodbye for the moment anyway, or au revoir. Okay then. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.